Welcome to the Painting Coach and welcome along to the second update in my New Year, New Army project. Now you might be thinking to yourself, hang on a minute, didn't you start that in February? And the answer to that question is yes. So you may then be thinking, isn't that a bit long of a delay between updates? And the answer to that question is yes. So then you may ask yourself the question, hang on a minute, is this project in trouble? And the answer to that would also be yes. Now, by way of bringing you up to speed very, very quickly, my friend Ben and I each bought each other one of the Christmas box sets with the intention of building and painting a 2,000-point Warhammer 40,000 army, then fight a battle. I got Ben the Tyranid Force and Ben got me the Astra Militarum, or Imperial Guard in old money. The intention was to use the contents of the box, build, paint, and then have a nice big battle against each other in the summer. Now, it's currently May, which means the summer is not very far away. Now, I'm sure Ben is in exactly the same boat as I am, so let's check in with him and see how he's getting on.
Me? Yeah, I'm doing good. Painted, one or two. One or two.
Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Let's look at where we're at. So this is the box set I got, the Astra Militarum. So I've got 2 Rogal Dawns, 2 squads of Cadian troopers, and a command squad to build and paint. That's just the start of my army. So let's see how I've got on in comparison to Ben and the fact that he basically has an entirely painted Tyranid force. Let's look at how we're doing. We've got our command squad there with all our various bits and pieces. We've got Ursula Creed. We've got a Castellan. We've got a 10-man Cadian shock troop squad here. Now, I've got another 10 upstairs on the painting table. We'll talk about them in a mo. So that's 20 of those. We've got a Rogal Dawn, which I've managed to snap the aerial off spectacularly, but I'll fix that with some sort of, I don't know what. We've also got our field ordnance battery as well. So that's what we've got built. These built models give me a grand total of 685 points built, which means I've got another 1,315 points to also build and then paint the entire lot of it. I think there's only one thing for it. I need a montage. All right, I'll get to it. It's very warm out. Stay hydrated, kids. Drink your water. Let's go. This video, we're going to have a look at how we're going to get some paint on the model. I'll show you how I've painted one of my Cadian shock troopers. And I'm also going to paint this Rogal Dawn. Well, the reason I've picked this Rogal Dawn is because Artis Opus very kindly sent me some of their Series D dry brushes. And having watched how Byron does his videos, I think they can really help me get a leg up in terms of how I paint this tank. So let's get up to the painting table and we'll have a look. So this is the scheme I've decided on. It's a grey uniform with some blue flak armour. I've no idea what regiment they're going to be, but I quite like how this looks. Let me very quickly show you how I achieve this. Artis Opus very kindly sent me their Series D dry brushes, and we're going to use them for a lot of this to see if they're any good. Now, for the infantry and the tank crew, I've started off spraying them with Mechanicus Standard Grey Primer, and for the tank, I've primed that with black. Now, I've used matte black from Colourforge. You can use whatever black primer you want. For the uniforms, I'm just going to dry brush up some lighter greys. To start with, I'm using Uniform Grey from AK, which is a little bit like Dawnstone from Citadel, and I'm also then going to use Silver Grey, which is very similar to Administratum Grey, maybe pushing towards Ulthuan Grey. I then base all the flak armour with Cantor Blue. This does need 2 coats. And then I'm going to take some Gravelord Grey Speed Paint, 50-50 mix with Speed Paint Medium, and paint this over all of the infantry, so armour as well as the uniforms. When that's dry for any leather bits, I'm going to paint that with Garrigax Sewer, which is a nice brown contrast paint. And for any boots or black elements, I'm going to paint those using Black Templar. To highlight the armour, I'm going to take a 50-50 mix of Cantor Blue and Calidor Sky and just focus this on the raised areas. I'm then going to go to pure Calidor Sky just to highlight the highest points on the armour. I'll use a little bit of Lothern Blue just to add a final highlight and some scratches that represent where the paint has been nicked on the armour. I use Zamesi Desert to highlight any of the leather bits. And then Mechanica Standard Grey for any of the darker parts. Painting the silver is easy and straightforward. I base it all using dark aluminium, wash it with some Nuln Oil, and then I highlight it with some chrome from Vallejo Model Air just to make it pop. The final highlight on the armour is with that silver grey from AK. Like I said, it's like Administratum grey, and this is just to pick out the folds. Moving on to the tank then, I wanted to follow the Artis Opus way of painting things, so we're going to give it a little bit of a go. Now I've got my damping pad here, so I'm going to dip the back end of the big brush in some water and then let that drop into the damping pad, pat it in a little bit. I'm then going to pop my brush onto the damping pad to take a little bit of moisture up. I'm now going to use dark grey from AK. You can use something like Mechanica Standard Grey, maybe Eshin Grey if you're using Citadel paints, and wipe all this off on a textured palette. And now I'm basically just going to dry brush this all over the tank. Now this is already starting to leave some of the darker colour in the recesses, which is really nice and the effect I'm going for. So straight away, this seems to be working quite well. There are some places I can't reach, so I'm just going to use a smaller dry brush to get into those areas. For the next stage, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I've not washed my brush, I'm just damping it on the damping pad, and now I'm using Uniform Grey from AK. I'm working this all over the tank. Now again, I'm looking to paint slightly less of a surface area with this, generally using nice circular motions. And this is going on quite well. If it does go on a little bit too thick in some areas, you can always go back to the other colour because that'll probably still be wet on your palette and you can just dab into it just to blend it down a little bit because I have gone a little too heavy in some of the places. The final highlight I'm going to do is with AK Silver Grey. Again, this is a very bright grey. Using the same brush again, haven't washed it, so it'll blend a little bit on the brush as well. And I'm just going to work all the way across the model in a nice circular motion, catching all of those raised areas. Now I've repainted some parts of the tank black so you can see how this looks after the dry brushing. Now I'm quite happy with it. I've not got any major issues and perhaps more importantly, this has been really quick. So this is really going to help me get back in the game of getting my army on the table. So for all the metallics, we're firstly going to base it all with dark aluminium. Now I'm not going to worry too much about highlighting and shading with acrylics. I'm going to use enamels across the model. And when it comes to those tracks, I'm just going to dry brush them. So obviously I'm going to be careful when I'm near the edge of the tank where it comes to the paintwork, but otherwise we're going to dry brush them because it's a nice and quick way. They're going to get a lot of weathering anyway to tie them into the battleground. Hi guys, Future Lloyd here, and unfortunately halfway through filming this video I did hurt my back, so unfortunately I've not been able to film every single step like I normally would. So this is going to be a little bit like that photo where it's step 1, step 2 and then step 3 is completely finished. So apologies for that. But look, if you do want more information about how to do all the weathering I've done on the tank, let me know down in the comments. Yes, I'm at a haircut as well. For all the stowage, I just use various contrast paint colours. I'm not going to go through them all. You can choose whatever works for you. Now, initially I thought this would work, but when it had all dried, I wasn't really happy. It didn't tie in with the tank very well. So I did go back over it with normal acrylics, just for painting it with some normal military style colours, just to bring them up to the level I wanted. I very carefully painted in the markings using some corn red. Now this is an easy-ish step. If you are struggling, you can use some masking tape. The only area I'd say to be very careful is when you're transitioning between the marking and the tank, because it'll be a lot harder to fix any mistakes you make painting on the tank itself. When that was done, I gloss varnished everything using an airbrush. You can use a can or a spray if you want to, but I prefer using something through an airbrush. I like VMS varnish. I think it gives you a great finish and it's really easy to control as well. I then applied a load of decals and then re-varnished over the top. So far, so good. I'm quite happy with how the tank is looking. Now it was time to shade everything. I used a panel liner which flows a lot nicer off the brush than having to make an oil wash up yourself and having to judge it. So this is ready mixed. I used one from MIG. It's a dark black, I think is the colour. And basically I just ran this over everything into the recesses around various parts. And I found this to be actually very effective and very quick. And probably one of the better panel liners I've used. I've used like Tamiya and AK in the past, but this one seems to be the one that just works. Doesn't need too much cleanup because of how it runs into those recesses. I give it about 10-15 minutes to dry, and then of course I took my Old Faithful makeup sponge and just rubbed it across the vehicle in the direction that I wanted any excess wash to flow or to streak. So basically it was in a downward motion regarding whenever part of the tank I was actually painting at the time. Nice and easy, and just takes away all of the worst bits. I used some Tank Tread wash, again from Ammo by MIG, which is kind of like a very dark reddy brown colour, just to shade all of the tank tracks themselves and the little bits that we've got on the turret. I probably should have, but I didn't bother waiting for that to dry before I went in and started adding the weathering. Now, I'm using liquid pigments from Life Colour. You can get them from lots of different brands, and these are essentially rust pigments. Don't forget, my army theme are going to be fighting on a Martian-style base, so I thought this was a really good way of actually tying the vehicles which don't have bases into the infantry. So the first thing I've done is take a dark rust colour and basically paint this all over the tracks. Now, the underlying shade is already wet, so it should blend in quite nicely. And I've also painted it along the bottom part of the tank as well, where I think this is going to accumulate. Now, the good things about liquid pigments like this in an enamel binder is that you can then take some enamel thinner and then just add this and stipple it along the edges, and that'll thin it out. And as it starts to dry, that'll show it blending in, which gives you a really, really, really nice effect. Again, whilst that was still wet, probably semi-dry, I then went in with a lighter rust colour and painted this all over the tracks as well. And again, this blends into the colour underneath, so it's not quite as bright as perhaps it would be on its own, but it really does start to give that effect that this is driving in a dusty Red Planet style environment. And again, using that enamel thinner just along the edges to feather it and blend it gives you a really, really nice dust effect that is actually quite controllable. I didn't have any black liquid pigment, so I just used some dry Vallejo pigment for the exhausts. I'm not a massive fan of dry pigments because I find them quite messy, and this was messy, but the overall effect worked quite nice. Once that had all dried, a little coat of matte varnish sealed it all in and tied everything together really nicely. And with that, the first tank of my new year, new army is done. I'm actually really happy with how this has turned out, but perhaps more importantly than that, this has reinvigorated my passion and enthusiasm for the project. I was a very, very long way behind, but this has actually gone together quite quickly. I think I'm going to have maybe 5 or 6 tanks in my army, so let's see how that all turns out. So there we have it. Despite the back injury, new year, new army is back on. Ben, I'm coming for you and your nids.